black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and I'd like to welcome you to today's discussion. For those of you who are new to the Umoja Circle, this is an African-centered talk show where we correct errors where errors are found and try to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. Here on the Umoja Circle, there are a number of reasons why I always incorporate the past in our history as Black people in America to help in my discussions of my current discussions pertaining to today's issues in our community. If you don't understand the past, you'll never understand the present. A present moment, that's what the present stands for, Present. So that means that this moment was sent to you by something in the past that happened. So unless you take the long view, at the same time you're taking the near view, which is the present moment, you must also look at the long view, which is the context. So you'll have a better understanding of what you need to do to recognize patterns. We must be able to look at what's going on today up close, like I said, and choose the best strategies without having to repeat or reinvent the wheel. Today's discussion I want to talk about will be dealing with the educational system, especially the mythology that follows what we are being taught about what happened in 1954, which is the Brown versus the Board of Education, and why I'm going to read these statistics. Today there's approximately 2.3 million teachers, but less than 7% of them are Black. There are something like 90,000 principals throughout the country, and less than 11% of them are Black. And out of the 13,800 superintendents who hold the pocketbooks in the educational system, only 3% of them are Black. Now, for many of you, that might seem a normal number since we did something like 12 or 13% of the population. But I want to introduce you to a great scholar who wrote a book that I'll be discussing on this show. They'll help you understand that not what you're told, even through Black History Month about Brown versus the Board of Education, and the fact that we don't have a lot of representation in the educational system. The mythology says that once Blacks were released from having only to go to the teaching profession, once Brown versus the Board of Education and desegregated schools, it allowed Black people to go into other professions. They no longer have to only go into teaching for some reason. That's the mythology. So what I'm going to talk about is the facts. And it's based on this book that I put up there. It's called Jim Crow's Pink Slip. Interesting name. And as it says on the side, the untold story of Black principals and teacher leadership. Okay, that's been around for since we got out of enslavement in 1865. It was written by this sister right here, Dr. Leslie Fenwick. Now, Dr. Fenwick, let me let you know that this is a brilliant scholar. And she had a personal reason for writing this book that goes back to when she was getting a doctoral degree at Ohio State, and the kind of information she saw was getting that went against the kind of information she had from her family members who were highly educated themselves. And she understood that the history that she was being taught was not the reality that she was told by many of her parents' generation about the schooling that they had that contradicts. And I find that interesting. There is a reason why we had such a low number. And as usual, America did not give the right perspective of what happened after Brown. There was backlash. Okay, but let me let you know who this Dr. Leslie Fenwick is. She's a master teacher. That's for one thing. Okay, and she's a master in educational administration. Okay, she's a dean emerita. It says dean emeritus. That's the male, but she's a female, so it's dean emerita at Howard University School of Education. She also holds an appointment as dean in residence for the American Association of Colleges. She was a visiting fellow at Harvard University. She worked at every level of the educational system, from preschool to K-12, and every level of educational administration. So she was a principal, she was superintendent, and now she's a dean emerita at Howard University. And she was also on the short list when they were looking for the next Secretary of Education under the Biden administration. Okay. She opens up her book by talking about an incident that happened to her. But I'm going to let you listen to what she had to say and why. There's a little video clip. It's an interview that she had on NPR that I want you to hear, this sister, before I come back and talk more about this.
On the show today, we've got this interview with Leslie Fenwick, who wrote the book Jim Crow's Pink Slip, The Untold Story of Black Principal and Teacher Leadership. In it, she argues that the landmark Browd versus the Board of Education decision that ended legal segregation in American schools also resulted in the mass firing or demotion of black principals and teachers. Because in those newly desegregated schools, white parents didn't want their white kids to be taught by black teachers. And she makes a point to NPR's Michelle Martin that we can see the ramifications of this still in the lack of diversity we see in school administrations today.
We talk a lot about educator diversity and the underrepresentation of Blacks and other people of color in the teaching force. You know, about 7% of the nation's 3.2 million teachers are Black, about 11% of the 93,000 principals are Black, and less than 3% of the nation's 14,000 superintendents are Black. But we've never talked about the history about why this is so. And one of the things I was trying to do in the book was push against the myth that after Brown and desegregation, that Blacks pursued careers en masse in other fields outside of education. Well, the historical record shows that the Black educator pipeline was purposely decimated after Brown.
This is so fascinating because one of the things you point out in your book is that there are these facts, but then there's this mythology that has built up around it, which is the opposite of what the facts indicate. I mean, one of the things you say is that there's mythology that, well, after Brown, all these Black educators just decided to do something else, make more money in other fields. And you're saying that that is the opposite of what actually occurred, that these people intentionally wanted to teach in these schools and were basically pushed out. And you point out, of course, it's not just the kind of loss of professional standing, but that then forced Black children to be in classrooms with people who, in many cases, did not want them there, because this is all occurring in the context of forced desegregation, right? You quote this Time magazine article published in 1965, which is you quote an article about the findings, quoting then U.S. Commissioner of Education Francis Keppel, who said, "We must not deceive ourselves that the exclusion of Negroes is not noticed by children. What can they assume but that the Negroes are not deemed by the community as worthy of a place in mixed classrooms? What can the white child assume but that he is somehow special and exclusive? How can the world of democracy have meaning to such children?" Talk more about that, particularly your concern about the educational environment that was then left for Black students.
The integrating previously all white schools now have more students in those schools, and there's a need for more principals and teachers. But with Black educators locked out of that equation, now we see the proliferation. We actually see the roots of the Black male educator crisis during this time period of white resistance to Brown. The majority of principals prior to Brown and directly after Brown were male. And so we begin to see the origins of the Black male educator crisis after Brown. They're being pushed out of schools. And so, there's a need to increase the number of principals and teachers to teach in these schools that have burgeoning student populations, and emergency certification, the ability to become a teacher without credentials. We see all these loopholes being created to get a warm body in front of students rather than to hire Black principals and teachers. And so not only are Black educators at the time affected by being fired, demoted, and dismissed, they also lose economic power because they're not hired into the newly integrated system. This then means that the newly integrated system has been orchestrated to be a white space, a white controlled space, where the levers of leadership, the levers of teaching, the levers of what the curriculum will include, the levels of funding are primarily controlled, almost exclusively controlled by white hands.
Well, welcome back. I hope you found what she said interesting. That's why I wanted to do this topic about Jim Crow pink slip. It wasn't the fact that Black people, as the myths go, decided to go into other careers other than teaching. What came about was that from about 1952, which is 2 years before the Brown decision, but all the evidence and all the cases were being fought that led up to Brown from about 1952. And in anticipation of that, a lot of these segregated dual system states, when it said dual educational system, well, that's the segregated systems where you had Black system and you had a white system. That's why the purpose of the Board of Education, Brown versus Board of Education came about. But it was just not only that, there was more. The insidiousness of the segregated South during that period of time and what they did in retaliation to the carrying out of the desegregation of the school system with Brown versus the Board of Education. She talks about an incident that put her on this path of discovery when she was going to get her doctoral degree again at Ohio University. Okay, she opens the book with this story. Hold on. About the professor that was leading the class. She thought that the class would it was the class on politics and education in the book. All right, she started off with this incident. But what she saw and what she heard from this professor was a list of things that were derogatory to her people, to us, which was even back then. I think it might have been in the 80s when the late 80s when she went to that class. They were still saying these things about our learning capacity, how our lack of interest was in education, which all was wrong. So she decided on her own to go to the university library there and look up and do research. Okay, and amongst the stacks of research material that she will determine. And also, as an educator, she's always teaching, because she said what she wants people who are trying to get their doctorate degree today to understand that you just don't accept what you're taught. Just because you're in a class, and just because this professor says this, you must always accept but verify. And that's what she did. She verified everything. And she found that what he was basing his information on was totally false. And why she said that? Well, in her research at that time, she came across a little known fact that I didn't even know that until I read the book, that in 1971, there was a Senate subcommittee led by then Senator Walter Mondale. He later became vice president. But he led this committee, and the purpose of this committee was they found out and tried to do a study on the fact that black people who were in the teaching profession prior to Brown were highly educated, highly certified. Many of them had doctorates themselves. Many of them had masters because of the way the system was set up in apartheid America, which is segregated America, Jim Crow America. It was also apartheid America. So they had to be, that's like many of us who are taught when we were little kids in the black community, that you got to do things twice as better. Well, many of these brothers and sisters, the fact that the way the segregated South was, there were 17 dual education systems. And this is from this committee. And what they found was that blacks who were in the segregated, regardless of whether the schools were dilapidated or had dirt floors or whatever, the teachers were highly educated. And the reason why is because even though they were tax-paying members of the states they were in, they were not getting accepted into the system with their tax money was not going to them in their school systems. So a lot of them, that's why there were so many people going to black institutions, historically black colleges. But if you wanted a higher degree and in one of these 17 segregated states in America, you could not get that degree in any of their schools in that state, if you're in Georgia and Mississippi, okay? And even if you went to one of the black institutions, if you wanted to go further on and it didn't offer, doctorates or DDS or other PhDs or whatever, medical schools, you had to leave your state. You had to leave the state. And this migration to certain universities that would accept blacks for higher learning. So you had a migration of black college graduated from Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, who were determined to get their higher education. So they would go to schools like NYU, New York University, Columbia, University of Chicago, the University of Iowa. Those schools accept and with graduate schools. Ohio State, I think, was another school, and they will be able to get their master's and PhDs or doctorate degrees. We were always about our education, okay? This just didn't happen from enslavement. This is the type of thing that goes back to the continent of Africa. Africans were about learning and educating. And soon after enslavement was over, that's why I got this book. This is another book that you might want to read about how we created the school systems and this way of educating our people when the states that we were in did not do it for us. So what they would do is migrate to these states that will allow them to get their degrees, and then they would go back to the segregated South. But the problem was, well, it wasn't a problem. They were controlled by the white state legislators in Georgia and Alabama and stuff like that. And that's why Brown was necessary, because the conditions they were in, the buildings were dilapidated maybe, or the books were not good, but the quality of the education that was given to black students by these teachers was above par. Because many of these teachers, just like, say, in schools like Dunbar or Sumner in I think Kansas City, where her mother went, he said in the book, the quality of the teachers were par excellence. For example, Sumner, like I mentioned, she mentions in the book where her mother went to. That's why she knew what that professor was telling her in that class about the low intelligence of blacks, or the poor quality of blacks getting educated, was a lie. She knew from her own experience and her own research, and what she found in this excuse me, Senate subcommittee, 1,500-page results with proper documentation in 1971 that blacks were highly educated. For example, they showed that as far back in the 1920s, in a school like Sumner in Kansas City, I'm just using that as an example, most of the teachers, these are the teachers, not the principals, not the superintendents. Most of the teachers, 40% of the teachers had doctorate degree, at least a master's degree. And this one is not in colleges, not in the black, historically black universities, but we're talking about preschool and middle school and high school. These were the qualities of education that black youths were getting. Plus, they saw images of themselves that was inspiring, so that they went on and went through the same process of going as far as they could in that state to get their degrees. And if they wanted to go become teachers, they would go to these schools like NYU and Columbia, like I said, to get their higher education. These are tax-paying Alabamians and Georgians, black, spending the same type of taxes that everybody else was taking. This is during segregation, but yet not getting the benefit of their tax dollars when they try to go to medical school or become lawyers or become DDS, dentists, whatever those higher doctorate type of education is. This is still the issue with America. We're still having this white backlash. Every time we take 2 steps forward, there was this white backlash of 3 steps backward. You still see today, look what's going on in Florida, with a CT or CRT or whatever this nonsense they're bringing up and trying to control the education of people. This has always been that. Why? Well, that's what racism is. It's embedded in the psyche of America. You cannot. It's a visceral response to black progress, and the same thing happened in the school system. All right. But what happened again with 1954 and the Brown versus the Board of Education, which is a fact and which is documented in this Senate subcommittee findings, 1,500-page findings, is that one of the reactions of Brown by these ex-Confederate states, this apartheid states, was the fact that what they did was start purging these well-educated and highly educated teachers, okay? Instead of incorporating them into the desegregation of their states, they found reasons of purging them, getting rid of them. That from from 1954 to the late 1970s, 100,000 black superintendents, black principals, and black teachers, highly credentialed teachers, were fired. Thus the title, Jim Crow's Pink Slip, on this book. It's a fascinating story. You wondering why, and we're still feeling the results of it today. Like I read, there's only 7% of teachers and 11% of the authority and principals and administration, and usually, and also at that time, there were a lot of black men who were in the position of superintendent, in the position of principals in these schools. And that kind of psychological change, when you're a little black boy, you don't see anybody that looked like you. And as I go into this for the next half hour, part 2 of this, we're going to talk about how our children were treated when they were forced to go into these once predominantly white schools. It was not pretty. Okay. So Brown, yeah, it did some good, but it also had a after effect that was not good for the black education in this country. And the fact that we have so less and limited black in administration and leadership roles in this country. So until next time, I'm going to say, I'm going to stop it right here and say peace, Hotep, bye-bye.